This is Fred McMurray, and today I've got the honor and privilege of talking with Jeff Cline, Strategic Accounts Manager for Rain for Rent. Did I get that right, Jeff?
Yeah, it's actually called the Director of Strategic Accounts. That's correct. How are you doing today, Fred?
I'm doing fine.
Good.
Today our topic is oil refinery turnarounds, and sounds like a scary topic. So why don't you tell our listeners a bit about what's involved with a refinery? What is it, and what's involved with a refinery turnaround?
Well, a refinery or a plant within a refinery is just like any other piece of equipment. Say, for instance, your car. It has to have routine maintenance. Things break, things, come apart, and things need to be cleaned up. So just like when you take your car in, there's different things they have to do. They have to flush different systems, and then there's also mechanical things that go wrong. You have to fix a piece of equipment, your carburetor goes down, or you have to replace things. And it's the same thing with a refinery because, it's hydrocarbons going through both, right? So basically what happens in this case is obviously you shut everything down, and they literally just start blinding off that section of the refinery from everything else, kind of enclose everything. And one of the first things they do is those flushes. They flush the systems. That can be done with chemicals. They take some of the items out and they'll clean them with water. They'll use the technique called hydroblasting, which is a really big, strong pressure washer, and some degreasers, just like you would with a car part. And so they do some cleaning. And then there's the mechanical part where if you were to drive by one of these refineries, you see these big columns in the air. So there's all kinds of internal components there and all throughout the system that they have to go in and do some repair work, make sure everything's functioning properly. Some of those items have to be taken out and replaced. There's all kinds of electrical things that have to be worked through and instrumentation. So it's just a time when they can do their maintenance and so that they can get that thing back cooking and run it for an extended period of time. This is not something they want to do often. So they've got a lot of work. It's very critical. And they got to get it done in a very short period of time so that they can go back to making product.
So you're saying that during this turnaround period, the plant is shut down, no production whatsoever, and effectively people are taking toothbrushes around to clean stuff up and replace it, although very big ones, I guess, with water.
In some ways, so kind of, sort of. So yes and no. A major refinery is broken up into many, many units. So they may take 2 or 3 units out at a time. So the rest of the refinery is functioning as usual. But there may just be 2 or 3 areas that are closed down. And yes, a lot of cleaning, a lot of maintenance, a lot of parts and pieces, a lot of logistics.
Wow. They can't want to do this often. How often do they do these things? I mean, we're not talking once a year. We're talking longer than that, right?
Well, maybe. Again, it depends on the unit. And again, going back to your car, there's certain things that have to be done. You need to change your oil every so often. There's different things that have to be done for preventative maintenance through the life of that car. And a plant is really no different. So they kind of schedule things depending on the plant and the needs of the maintenance of the plant. It could be every year. It could be every 3 years. But it's very common for a plant to be on every 5-year schedule. That's very common for the major components of a refinery. Every 5 years they're going to go in and do that major work.
So if you're doing something once every 5 years, then that sounds like there should be a whole lot of planning involved, shouldn't there?
Oh, absolutely. The planning infrastructure would probably be much larger than you would expect. You may have, and again, everything is proportional. It depends on the size of the refinery and the size of the unit. But yeah, you can have, a dozen or 2 dozen people working on a major shutdown for a couple of years to prepare. There's just so many mechanisms that have to go into play. And again, just doing this safely and executing properly takes a lot of forethought. Even though a lot of cases they've done it before, everything it comes back around and you have to learn your lessons and you retool and you become more efficient. So there's a lot that goes into the planning of a shutdown.
Okay, so you said the S word, so the duct comes down, or for those of you who don't remember Groucho Marx, you said the safety word. Tell us a bit about your approach, Rain for Rent's approach to safety, what you've seen in the past, and how you make sure that both Rain for Rent and plant and, I guess, civilians around the plant stay safe?
Well, that's a really good question because, obviously we have our safety principles that we have to adhere by and policies and procedures, but, everything we have to do kind of has to be aligned with our customer, the people we're working for. So we have to understand their culture, their expectations, and then ours really have to mimic each other. So it's not a casual thing. There's a lot of big communication. There's sharing back and forth of information. They make sure that they understand our culture, and we make sure that we understand their culture and that we're aligned. But I want to tell you something that's really been helping us over the last few years, and it really speaks to that, is a program we call our pre-work plan. So this is a program where we get the information as early as possible from the customer, and we start looking at potential needs and the scope of the work, and we start formulating a plan. Now, what I mean by the plan is we got to understand all the risks, the environmental risks, and all the other things that are going on in the area that they have that are unrelated to what we have. But then we also have to understand what's related to us and the task at hand. And we're handling a lot of liquids. That's what we're in. We're in the liquid handling business. So it's very important that we understand the material and the scope of what we're going to get, because materials have to be compatible. We can't supply something that can't hold an acid if we're going to hold an acid, so to speak. The pressures have to be proper. Again, we build systems just like a temporary plant. So we go through all that. We go hand in hand with the customer, so they're part of the process. Our crew's involved in that. Again, we're taking into account all the hazards that could possibly be associated with this job. So when we execute it, two things are happening. We have a really good plan of action, which means we have all the right equipment and the right things that we need so that we're not wasting time running in circles, and that we can be very efficient on the job site. But also, we know all the risks ahead of time, and we're not surprised, and us and the customer have communicated properly, and we know exactly what we're facing. It makes for a much safer job site.
So when you say that, I'm thinking in my head, it sounds like you have to be a master logician or a logistician, whatever you want to call it. So you said tanks and pipes and fluids and get moved back and forth. You have to be, I guess, somewhat of a clairvoyant to be able to see everything that's potentially can go wrong. And then it strikes me you have to be a diplomat, because besides interacting with the client, aren't you also potentially interacting with state, local, and federal officials on some of this stuff?
Yeah, actually, there's a lot of different moving parts here. So you're right. We have to be able to meet with the client, and that client is complicated because we have different layers and different responsibilities within that customer. And then we have contractors that are maybe associated with our work or not, that are in the same area. So it's very important that we're on the same page and we understand each other's expectations and the scope, because we have to work together as a team to make our work properly. But yes, from a government standpoint, they're abreast of what's going on. So they know what is happening in these facilities, and there's some things that are of interest to them from an environmental standpoint and a safety standpoint. Obviously, it's because it's the number one goal of these shutdowns is nobody gets hurt and that there's no environmental risk or issues. And from that standpoint, so we have, again, safety, then you have environmental. Where environmental comes into play is that, for us, we're taking material, this wash water, this fluid that I was speaking of, we're actually capturing that material. And some of that stuff is hazardous to the atmosphere, so that stuff cannot, from an airborne standpoint, that stuff just can't go straight to atmosphere. It has to be, those vapors have to be captured and cleaned and before it's released. So the government absolutely has a stake in that and make sure that goes well. But also, a lot of this stuff is just waste. The cleaning material is stored, so that waste has to be disposed of and managed in a manner that is consistent with the regulations that have already been spelled out. So, yeah, there's a lot of different parts and pieces, and I could probably go on for an hour about all the different things that have to be taken into account.
I think you could probably teach a class just on governmental regulations influencing this stuff, because you're saying it's not only OSHA, you're saying EPA, state EPA.
Absolutely.
State. Wow.
I mean, it goes beyond that, because a lot of this waste is actually disposed of off-site, and from that standpoint, now you have to deal with the Department of Transportation. So, and obviously the Department of Energy is interested in these refineries as well.
This sounds like a perfect place to punch somebody in the head, because it sounds like tempers can get hot if anytime you mix in governmental officials. But that's neither here nor there, so we won't go into that. So tell me, rain for rent. Okay. How do you get rain for rent and oil refinery turnarounds?
Well, that's a very interesting question. So our company has roots. We really started in the oil field out in Bakersfield, California, but we have roots in irrigation. So for years, and we still do this today, we provide irrigation equipment out west to some of the largest farms in America that grow most of the items that you would see on the salad bar. So that takes a lot of engineering and expertise to pull off these major irrigation systems. So we have a lot of engineers on staff, and we have all kinds of pumping and piping and filtration equipment to accommodate that irrigation. So we basically took the same equipment and the same expertise. We have all these engineers on staff, and we took all this expertise and we applied it to industry, because the fixed facilities and different things, construction, the same thing. They have needs as well for temporary equipment that handles liquids.
Understand. So when you talk about the equipment, you talked about piping and pumps, and this isn't the stuff you can go to Lowe's or Home Depot and get, is it?
No, this stuff's very industrial. The equipment that we provide is probably larger than what most people would see if you haven't been into one of these facilities. So when most people think of a pump, they may think of a sump pump. Well, yeah, we have small pumps like that, but we have big pumps that are, thousands of pounds that are trailer mounted that can move hundreds to thousands of gallons a minute and pressures up to 250 psi. So that's large. The piping, steel, 6-inch, 8-inch, 12-inch, big industrial hoses and filtrations. Everything's we deal in large stuff. You won't find us on the aisle at Lowe's. No, sir.
Didn't think so. So can you just kind of share with us one of the best experiences on a turnaround where you guys really crushed it and made the client look wonderful, or bailed somebody out of a deep mess?
Well, I could talk about a number of them, but we most recently had an occasion where, I was speaking about how ahead of the game, you really have to have conversations, and we have to understand their schedule and their expectations, and our planning has to be aligned, and we have to follow their schedule. They're not going to arrange their maintenance on us, right? So we actually did have a client of ours who actually chose to go in a different direction, and we were not part of their pre-planning. And, well, anyway, their plan was not aligned, and their schedules did not match. And so they were 2 years into this planning stage for the shutdown, and here we are, 2 months prior to the shutdown, and we get the call and say, and customers apologize, this hasn't worked out, our calendars aren't matching up. And so we had to come in and really take months of planning and act quickly. And so we did that, and we took action, and we were able to meet the customer's expectations. So sometimes planning doesn't, the calendar doesn't work out, and we have to move really, really quick. We're in the emergency response business as well. So sometimes we have a really quick call to action.
So it sounds like somebody went into like a telephone booth, took off their suit coat, and came out in cape and blue suit and said up and away.
We do that daily, to be quite honest. As much as I talk about planning, we actually have to do that often, because nobody really, these shutdowns, they plan well in advance, but a lot of our business is immediate needs that the customers were not expecting, upsets and things of that nature. So it's not uncommon for us to get an immediate need that we have to respond to within an hour. So that's very common.
You're not talking about turnarounds there. So there's other types of liquid handling work that you do at refineries?
Oh, sure. Yes, there's different maintenance things, because anything it's a piece of equipment. Anything can go at any period of time. So there's a lot of unexpected things that pop up, and we have to respond to. Say, for instance, as you can imagine, these plants have a lot of their own pumps. Well, guess what? Sometimes pumps fail. Well, we rent pumps to facilitate that. So we come in and kind of become the temporary infrastructure of these plants with our equipment. And a lot of times we're handling their materials, and sometimes we get a heads up and sometimes we don't. And we have to do this very quickly, and it's a lot of pressure, but we pull it off. There's a lot of engineering that goes into this thing. We can't just take this equipment and put it out there handling this hazardous material, we'll call it. So we have to engineer this stuff quickly. We have to design, and then we have to install, too. We have to perform. So we have to go from looking like an engineering company one moment to then what you might consider a construction company 30 minutes later and perform. So it's complicated, but we've been doing it for years, so we've got it down.
Okay, so we'll go with what you just said, and I'll ask you, tell our listeners a bit about your history at Rain for Rent, because somehow in as we've been talking, I get this feeling that you didn't start last January.
No, I started about 20 Januaries ago.
Okay.
It was actually in December. So I started one of our branches in Mobile, Alabama. That's where I live right now. So I was part of that branch. We started the branch, and I was in sales for a few years, and I decided to get into management. I was a branch manager for a couple of years, but I really missed being in the field with the customer, solving problems. And so I got back out, and I've been doing that ever since. And as you can tell, we get into a lot of different things. So it's pretty exciting because you never know what the next phone call is going to be. And we work along a lot of different industries. So a few years ago, I became a corporate employee, so now I travel around and I help other people who haven't been with us for 20 years and help our clients and help set the company up for success. But I want to tell you the coolest thing because, again, I worked at my local branch for 17, 18 years, and I was the first employee there. Well, we have 2 facilities locally, and every time I go back, I cannot find a place to park. I'm the guy that has to park the furthest away. I can't find anything. It's really cool. I do that every time. I'll drive in there and how cool is this? We've hired so many people, and we've grown so big that I don't even fit here anymore. And that's the most exciting thing. It's been really cool.
That is awesome, to grow something to the point where you're walking a long ways to get in the house. That's awesome. All right, So I got two last questions. One is, where do you see the downstream petroleum market heading within the next couple of years?
Man, it's really exciting. I'm going to say that because there's such energy right now. There's construction actually all up and down the Gulf Coast, really, on the petrochemical side. But for refineries in general, the maintenance is probably as high as I've seen in a while. So which means companies are investing in these refineries, which means they want them to work. They need them running because there's a lot of opportunity for these owners. So there's actually talk about new growth from standpoint of construction in refineries, which we haven't heard in a long time. So that industry is strong, and we are moving very well. What's more exciting is the actual petrochemical side, the chemicals, because there's plastic plants and things of that nature coming up all over the place in the Gulf Coast because of the cheap feedstock they get out of the oil fields that you're hearing about from the fracking. So that's going to be a huge boom, and we're also, I believe, in the next 10 years, we're going to see it in Appalachia, too, around West Virginia and Ohio. And I think in the next 10 years, you're really going to see the United States become a major exporter of plastics and other chemicals that we haven't been part of in the last 100 years.
Wow. So that's a very rosy future. Glad I asked.
It is.
All right. So
it's exciting for the United States economy.
Amen. And things that are exciting for the U.S. economy make me happy.
That's right.
So then the last question, so we'll end this off with a simple question. Why should our listeners, if they're going to be planning a refinery turnaround or another major liquid engineering project, why should they use Rain for Rent?
Well, that's a really good question. So like I said, within a refinery, equipment we're using, these storage tanks, pumping and piping, again, we're coming in temporarily. We're more or less becoming the infrastructure of the plant while it's shut down to handle this material. And there's no joke to that. This stuff has to be handled properly. So I've been in the rental industry for over 20 years. I started with a general rent company prior to doing this. And my experience is that with a piece of a rental equipment, it tends to just get grabbed and thrown to work. You know, when you go rent a car, you tend to just get in it, start it, and you go. And that's kind of the same thing with a backhoe or a generator or an excavator. You just want to put it to work. Well, unfortunately, that mindset is spilled over into our equipment line, and people just want to grab these tanks and pumps and put them to work. Well, here's the problem. Like I said, we're kind of becoming the infrastructure for this material that may be hazardous. Now, that plant is handling this material. They have to take all kinds of safety precautions, right? They can't be irresponsible. They do engineering. They put all kinds of mechanisms in place. So why would we do that, right? So unfortunately, there is this thing in our industry where people are just grabbing equipment and putting it to work. And that might be typical of a company that rents generators or excavators. Well, we can't be typical. Like I said, our roots are in, back irrigation. We have to design that system, install it, and that thing better work or we're not getting any food, right? So our history and our roots are generated in performance. So that kind of what makes us different. We take a process safety approach to our business similar to a plant. So that's exciting for me because it gives me confidence when I'm speaking to a customer to make sure that we're going to deliver a good system for them.
So you're saying Rainford liquid ingenuity for productive, safe project completion.
Absolutely. Good job. You're catching on.
See, I do listen. I want to thank Jeff Cline for enlightening us on refinery turnarounds, how Rain for Rent is, as far as I can tell, the best place to go to when you've got liquid engineering projects to complete. Thanks, Jeff, and have a great day.
Thanks for the opportunity. You too.